Welcome to the California garden in the month of July. Summer is on and the plants are growing and producing a lot of fruits and vegetables. So sit back and enjoy this episode. We will begin with a garden tour. We will look at the harvest we made this month. We will look at some things for you to do in your garden. And finally, we'll take a look at some cool gardening products. So let's begin with the garden tour, starting with the raised beds. We have some gourds growing on the first bed, followed by the Anaheim chili peppers that are producing a lot of peppers. We also have the eggplants, the Little Prince eggplant, and this eggplant is loaded with eggplants, as you can see. And right next to the eggplants, we have our tomato jungle. Our tomatoes have grown like crazy. As you can see, the plant has just taken off and has grown onto our easy trellis and is producing a lot of tomatoes. This year we planted two varieties of tomatoes in the raised beds. One is the Italian grape tomato and the San Marzano tomato. On the other side we have our bean plant. This is the pole bean plant that is producing a lot of beans. And what you see here is the winter melon plant that's grown from the other bed and has continued to grow on this bed. You can see the winter melons here. They look pretty good and they are quite big. We have our fava beans plant, which produced a lot of beans. You will soon see the harvest. And in the first bed, we have some more cucumbers. The cucumber plant produced a lot of cucumbers. And we also have our hyacinth beans, which have started flowering, and you can see a lot of beans that are being produced now from these plants. We have some new additions to our container garden. This guava tree was replanted from a whiskey barrel container and is growing quite well. And we also have a new plant. This is a Java plum tree, also called the jamun tree. And this produces purple colored berries which are absolutely delicious. And this is about a 5-year-old tree, and I'm looking forward to see how this grows. We also have our mango tree that's growing quite well and is producing new leaves. And our loquat tree is also producing leaves and should produce fruits in the next year. And now let's look at the harvest we made, starting with pole beans. We have our pole beans plant that was growing on this easy trellis, and pole beans plant produce a lot more beans than bush beans simply because they spread out on a very large area. And this easy trellis is quite easy to make. If you haven't checked out a guide on making this easy trellis, do check it out. And as you can see, the pole beans that are being harvested, they're quite good. And we have been getting a lot of pole beans on this plant. And remember to check your pole bean plant every few days. If you wait too long, the pole beans will grow larger than the size it needs to be harvested at. And as you can see, the pole bean plant has these beautiful purple flowers, and these become these pole beans that you see. Now there are a lot of different varieties of pole beans. This one is by Renee's Seeds, which is a very nice variety to grow. And here you can see the harvest. It looks beautiful. Our pole beans were one of the most successful plants that we planted this season. Moving on to fava beans. Now the fava beans, they are slightly larger. They are very unique tasting beans, and this is the first time I am growing fava beans, and they have been doing very well so far. We have been able to harvest a lot of fava beans from just 4 or 5 plants. And the bean itself looks pretty big in size. The pods are bigger as well. And you can harvest the fava beans once they are dry, completely dry, or you can even harvest them when they are green like this. Now the reason I harvested them at this stage is because I wanted to cook the fava beans, and I have a very nice recipe that I used to cook my fava beans. Fava beans is also known by different names like butter beans. And overall I was quite happy in growing fava beans. The plants were quite healthy. They grew quite well. And as you can see, the fava beans are producing all these pods that will yield a lot of beans. The fava bean skin is not edible, so you need to make sure that you actually open the fava beans and then use the beans that are inside the pod. And here you can see the harvest looks beautiful. That's quite good quality fava beans right there in your backyard. And now I'm going to show you how the fava bean looks like on the inside. So let's open up this fava bean. And you can see quite large pods of beans. These are the actual edible beans that are inside the pods. So we're going to go ahead and shell these fava beans. We're going to be cooking this with some onions, tomatoes, garlic, and some spices. And they taste amazing. And you can make a lot of things with fava beans. Some people like to just boil it, add it to soups. I like to cook it with onions, tomatoes, and spices and potatoes, as I mentioned. And that makes a great fava bean dish, which you can eat with tortillas. So overall, I was quite happy growing fava beans for the first time. I think it yielded quite good fava beans. Moving on to cucumbers. We had one cucumber plant that we planted right in the middle of this raised bed. And as you can see here, the size of the cucumber is quite large and the plant was growing very well this season. And the only change I did this season versus the last was that I used a lot of vermicompost in my raised beds, and I also used worm tea every 10 days or so. Now the VermisTerra worm tea is something that is really causing a lot of changes in my garden for the good. I can see a lot of good growth in my plants, and if you're using a liquid fertilizer like fish or seaweed, you can continue to do that. And if you can get your hands on the worm tea, that's something that I highly recommend. It gives a lot of additional nutrients to the plants and they have been growing quite well. Eggplants. We have been growing this Little Prince eggplant and the plant has been growing quite well and yielding a lot of eggplants. Now these are smaller eggplants, but you can also see some large eggplants that are growing. It's best to harvest these eggplants when they are small. They taste really well when they are small. And this eggplant is just loaded. All these plants are loaded with eggplants, and we could harvest a lot of eggplants almost every day from this plant. And you can see the harvest, it looks amazing. In fact, we got so many eggplants that we had to give away a lot to friends and family. And this is one eggplant variety that I highly recommend you grow in your home garden. Cayenne peppers. We were growing this cayenne pepper plant in a container which we had overwintered. And cayenne pepper is a hot pepper variety. So if you like growing hot peppers, this pepper variety will satisfy your taste buds. It's a very hot pepper variety. Not as hot as the black cobra pepper, but still quite hot. So we harvested a lot of these cayenne peppers from our containers. This new pepper variety called Alter Ego was something that we planted in our container, and this yielded very good quality peppers. Now this is the first time I'm growing this pepper variety, and this is supposed to be a pepper that's hot as well as sweet. It has like a hot sweet taste, kind of a mixed taste, and they were actually pretty interesting. So if you want to try a new pepper variety, do try the Alter Ego pepper. These are available in Home Depot and the plant grew very well. I was growing this plant in just cocoa coir and worm castings, something that I will review in the later part of the video. And it seemed to do a great job at creating a healthy pepper plant that was growing quite well and yielding a lot of peppers. Now I'm usually not very successful growing pepper plants, but this season after using the VermisTerra worm tea, I was able to finally grow some pepper plants without any diseases, without any nutrition deficiencies. And if you want to buy this product, do check out the product links in the video description below. This is something that I highly recommend. I have been using it for some time and I only recommend products that I really like and products which have a good effect on your plants, and this is one that I would recommend. Moving on to potatoes. We were growing a variety of potatoes in our whiskey barrel container, including the purple one that you can see here. These are the purple potatoes. And in the same container, we also were growing a couple more varieties, which we began to harvest. These were right at the surface of the plant. And we also had 2 more potato varieties here, the red potatoes as well as the Yukon Gold potatoes. So the purple potatoes, you can see we had 2 plants and both of them were yielding quite a lot of potatoes. And these are the purple potatoes as well as the red potatoes that you can see. And when growing potatoes in a whiskey barrel container, you just need to make sure that you have a lot of good loose soil. Almost 50% of the soil is compost. We used a lot of compost. And you can see the potatoes, they just look amazing. There are a lot of potatoes, a lot of colorful potatoes, and a lot of potatoes as you can see. And as we keep going through the soil, we will find more and more potatoes. And growing potatoes in whiskey barrel containers is quite easy. All you do is plant 4 or 5 seed potatoes and they will grow and produce a lot of potatoes in the whiskey barrel. Extremely easy to grow. The potatoes are delicious. Here you can see our entire harvest. We got a lot of potatoes from this whiskey barrel container. And this is the joy of gardening at home. You can grow your own varieties. For example, the purple potatoes that are not so easy to find at the grocery stores. And moving on to tomatoes. We harvested a lot of tomatoes, different varieties of tomatoes. These are the super bush variety of tomatoes that we planted in our whiskey barrel container. They grew quite well. This variety produced quite large tomatoes, and this is one variety that I can highly recommend that you can grow in containers. It's a determinate tomato variety and it grew quite well. And all this season, all we did is use some organic fertilizer at the base of the plant, fed the plants with a liquid fertilizer every 10 days or so. And the results were quite good. As you can see, the tomato plants really did well. No insects or diseases on these tomato plants. And we got a huge yield from each of these plants. And you can see the fruits are almost perfect. The tomatoes look almost perfect. Now when growing in containers, you need to choose determinate tomato varieties just because they grow quite well in containers. And once again, the harvest looks quite good. They are quite large tomatoes and absolutely delicious. Now in our raised beds, we were growing the San Marzano tomato that we started harvesting this month. And we harvested a lot of tomatoes. The San Marzano tomato is one that I highly recommend if you like paste type tomatoes. So when you cut the tomatoes, you can actually see a little paste on the outer surface and they are quite delicious. The San Marzano tomato is quite nice if you're making pastas or stir fries or even converting your tomatoes to paste and then storing it. And tomato paste can be used in a wide variety of dishes. So this is one tomato variety that's easy to grow. The harvest looks beautiful and one variety that I can highly recommend that you grow in your home garden. And the San Marzanos are quite large in size too. So they grow quite well and give you a lot of tomatoes. And these are the Italian grape tomatoes. And you might have seen these pictures on Instagram that you liked so much. Everyone liked these pictures, so thank you very much for that. And these grape tomatoes come in bunches, as you can see, a lot of tomatoes. And we were harvesting these tomatoes almost every day from our raised beds. And as you see here, there are quite a lot of tomatoes. This plant is a heavy producer. The Italian grape tomato is a plant that produces these grape-sized tomatoes. Not really a grape, it's quite larger than a grape, but produces a lot of these tomatoes. And just look at this harvest. This is what is the joy of home gardening. Now let's look at some things for you to do in your garden this month. If you see spider mites or other insects in your garden, this is a good time to use a natural insect repellent like the one you see here. We're using this on our tomato plants as well as on our okra plants. This is Dr. Earth's natural insecticide, which basically is a combination of oils that repel insects. Now you can also handpick some insects that you see. Large insects like caterpillars that cause damage to your leaves. You can just look around in your garden and these are very visible on plants like eggplants and tomatoes. you can just pick them off and throw them. The other thing you can do is start pruning your plants like curry leaf plants so that they grow in a more bushy way. This is a good time to do that. And make sure that you're using a liquid fertilizer like compost tea or worm castings so that your plants are getting adequate nutrients. In the gardening products section, we will look at a growing medium. This is a cocoa coir based growing medium and it contains cocoa chips. This product is by VermisTerra. It's the same company that makes the worm castings and the worm tea. And if you look at this product, this is basically coconut coir with a lot of chips, a lot of big coconut chips as you see here. And this is very unlike the other cocoa coir bricks that I have reviewed, which only had like fine husk. Now, since this potting mix contains both the cocoa coir as well as the cocoa chips, you don't really need to add anything else to this growing medium, like no perlite, no vermiculite. You can just use this medium as is, and this is what makes it a great medium. Now the cocoa coir brick has to be soaked in water to break it down into what you see here. And there are many ways to do it. What you're seeing here is just immersing the cocoa coir brick into something like an aluminum foil and fill it up with water. And as the brick absorbs the water, it will start breaking down and you can then move it to another container or just move it to another place where you can store it. Now if you want, you can add some more water, and we're going to be using this growing medium to plant our cardamom plant. And we're using this VermisTerra worm castings. Now the recommended proportion to mix the worm castings with the cocoa coir mix is 1 part worm castings to 3 parts of the growing medium. And all we are doing is just mixing the cocoa coir and the worm castings in that proportion, and then we are going to be planting our cardamom plant. Now this cardamom plant is a tropical plant, and this sized container is quite good for this plant to start with, and then eventually as the plant grows, we will transplant it into bigger containers. So you can see here the plant is quite root bound in this small container. And all we're going to do is just free up the roots and then plant it into this cocoa coir mix that we just created. Now at the first glance, this mix looks excellent. It seems to be of quite premium quality. It is quite well draining, as you will soon see. And all we're doing now is just packing in some more growing medium onto the top of the plant. And it's not only very porous and draining, it also provides quite good support to the plants. Now cocoa coir is a very interesting medium. It actually lasts for a very long time and it won't decompose very quickly. At the same time, it provides great support to your plants while being a fast draining mix. Now remember, this contains cocoa chips, so this makes it a far superior product than what we reviewed earlier, which is the cocoa coir bricks without the cocoa chips. And what we are going to do is use the worm tea. This is the VermisTerra worm tea. So while planting, we will just use this worm tea to add some nutrients to the soil. This plant will go in the greenhouse, so it's important that we add a lot of nutrients. Now you can see right away the worm castings that we added in the pot are leaking from the bottom of the container. And a solution to that is to use a pot saucer, or a saucer that you can use to contain or catch the water from the bottom of containers, and that will help you preserve all the nutrients that are there in the soil. The plants will absorb that back slowly. Now this is another plant. This is a jasmine plant that we wanted to transplant because it had become root bound, and I thought it would be a good idea to use the cocoa coir based potting mix which contains cocoa chips, the VermisTerra cocoa coir potting mix. And the first step to do is to prune the plant very well, and once the plant is pruned, you are ready to transplant it. And then you just pull the plant out just like that, and this is a severely root bound plant. It will come off just like what you see here. And the next step is to wash the roots, as we have done here. We have pruned the roots a little bit so that they fit into the container. and then we have washed the roots. And all we are going to do now is take our container which contains the coco coir growing medium, and this already has the worm castings, and all we do is place the plant inside this container, first making enough space so that the plant fits in. And you can actually see how the plant would eventually fit into the container, and then just add the coco coir growing medium just around the plant like that. And remember, we are not using any perlite or vermiculite. You don't need to do that with this mix. And this brings down the cost of your potting mix considerably, because you're only using the coco coir potting mix with the chips. You're not adding any perlite, you're not adding any vermiculite, and the worm castings is the only other recommended addition that you can add to your potting mix. And once that's done, you can just water your plant. Make sure that the roots are moist. And coco coir also retains a lot of moisture, so you don't have to water the plant very often like in the case of other potting mixes. And here is a plant after a few days. As you can see, it has settled down and is now producing new leaves and will soon produce a lot of flowers. Now this is the other efficient way that I found of breaking up the coco coir brick, which is quite dry. So all you do is take it and put it into a garden cart like you see here with some water, and keep adding water till the coco coir brick softens. And it takes a little longer than I thought for the coco coir brick to break up into smaller pieces, but as you can see here, it absorbs a lot of water, and within a few hours you can see that the coco coir brick has completely expanded. So there we have it, folks. That was our episode on the California garden for the month of July. If you like this video, do give us a thumbs up, and if you have any comments, leave them in the comments box below. We'll see you again soon. Happy gardening.